Greg Byrne. Here we are at the World Production Studios for RAD here in Washington, D.C. Hope everyone's having a nice day. We're going to give everyone about another minute, and we'll start right in. So welcome, and just hold for another sec. Okay, I think we'll get started. As always, we'll open up shortly for just broader questions and answers that people have. But today I'm joined with Cheryl Teninga, who, among other things, runs our application team. And what we thought we'd do at the start of the hour is take a sample application and just go through the logic of the RAD application. Sometimes it's helpful to understand either why we've organized the application in a certain way or what's the reason why we're collecting a certain amount of data. And then as we go through that, Cheryl and I will at various times sort of hit on a few things that we see as sort of common errors or faults that we see with applications that we review. So now on the screen right now, it's just reminding you sort of, for those who this is the first time on the call, how you can ask us a question. You can either electronically raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can send us an email to our rad@hud.gov account. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the RAD website, and we are going to find the application material. So we'll go, here's the RAD website, which is www.hud.gov/rad, and we're back again. All right, so we'll go to the bottom of the RAD website where it says Application and Closing Materials. We'll click on that, and then we'll go down to Public Housing Materials, and we'll click on the state. In this case, because it so rarely sort of gets its moment in the sun, we're going to pick on West Virginia, and we'll click on Application Materials, and then click on Open. So clearly what's happening here is that there's a package of applications or a file for every state. So every state has one Excel file that has every single public housing project built into it. So the application has a series of tabs. There's the instructions tab, which isn't a bad thing to look at once in a while. There's the actual application form. There's a board approval form, which gets spit out after you finish the application tab. Financing letter of interest, which we ask you to have, we never have a lender involved, to get someone to sign to say this is a reasonable presentation of the deal. If you have a mixed finance project, it's sort of what both the mixed finance developer or owner and the PHA will sign. Choice mobility, we'll talk about what that is and when it's applicable. But there's also a validation tab, and the validation tab is just, this provides all the background data that we pull from to populate the database. So if it turns out that some of the values are, you're finding there's something wrong and inconsistent with what you know to be the case for your property, then you can look to see what our data shows, and you can correct it. There's another tab, Sample Pick Data, and again, it's sort of another sort of source of data that we sort of pull from. And the last tab is it just shows all the projects in that state that we're pulling from, so, and the operating funding and whatnot. Okay, so we're going to go to the application form, which is what you're going to fill out. And our first instruction to PHAs before you even begin to fill it out is that really, when you're about to complete a RAD application, this this should be the stage where you've already figured out the deal. You already know the project, you know what the pro forma looks like, you know what the development budget looks like, and all you're going to do now is just really transcribe that sort of conceptualized plan for your property onto this. If you're trying to use the application as a markup or a scratch pad to figure out what to do with the project, it doesn't work that well. That's when you instead should use the inventory assessment tool that we also publish on the website. But here is you've already figured out the deal, you know you're going to apply, and now really what you're doing is you're just entering the data in a certain way in which we ask you to enter the data. So what we'll do is you first, in all gray cells are cells that you enter. And so the first is what development number. Since we're in the state of West Virginia, we're just going to pick the first project, WV001, which is the Charleston Housing Authority, and their first AMP is 002. So, and then it automatically populates not just in this section, but in other sections, certain data about the property, who the housing authority is, who the executive director is, and whatnot. Okay, so that's all you need to do for Section 1 is pull up the project. Section 2, we're asking you for some certain information about if we're going to review your application, we need to contact somebody. Who are we going to contact? Is it still going to be the ED, or is it going to be somebody else? So here's where you put in who the contact person is to follow up on. That's on sort of lines or row 19. Next on row 22 is we ask you, are you converting to project-based rental assistance, or are you converting to project-based vouchers? The only impact for purposes of this application is that the rent caps are a little bit different when it comes to PBRA conversions versus PBV, and that's the only real significance here. By you applying and saying now you're going to do PBV and not PBRA is in no way binds you. You can change at any moment after you make an award up to a certain period, because then you're going to lock in because you're going to give us a financing plan. So for all practical purposes, you know, you can make a change largely up to when you submit your financing plan to us. Okay, the next row, 24, that we'll ask for data for is this a mixed finance project, and it's populated, it's pre-populated by our data system. It says we're not aware of this to be a mixed finance project, so we code it as no. If that's not right, if for whatever reason the data in PIC, which PIC the acronym is for Public Housing Information Center, our sort of data warehouse in public housing, then you would correct that on row 25 and say, yes, this really is a mixed finance project. Okay. Next, row 27, if you're requesting a choice mobility exemption for this project, and you're going to press yes or no. Just remind people that who can be exempt from choice mobility. So first of all, there's an exemption for PHAs who do not operate a voucher program, that they are eligible for a choice mobility exemption, and they are converting to PBRA. Or you're asking for a choice exemption because you already administer a voucher program, and more than a third of your vouchers are already designated for certain types of sort of HUD priority cases, such as vets, homeless, and I think homeless. I don't think what other category was, but anyway, but there's in the notice. I apologize. I should have the reference, but if you qualify for in the notice sort of where you already are giving a preference in your voucher program for certain sort of high priority cases, then you could apply for an exemption. Otherwise, there's no other exemptions. And we have said that we will make exemptions for choice mobility for 10% of all our awards. And we've only had a handful of PHAs actually ask for exemptions right now. So the next PHAs that are eligible and ask for an exemption will receive it, because we have a far way to go before we would hit that cap. Okay, so next what it says is it says tell us whether this data in PIC is right on your project. In this particular case, it's got 108 units, and it shows you the bedroom distribution. And if you say on row 35 that yes, it's correct, then good, and you move down to the proposed unit distribution. But if it's not correct, then we ask you to enter the correct data and then tell us on row 42 what was the date that you sent the PIC ticket to correct that data. Because if it's wrong, then you should be correcting it in PIC. Okay, so then we go to the next table, which is what are you trying to do with the project? And if you have 108 units now, are you proposing to do the same number of units in the same bedroom distribution, or are you trying to do something else? And are there other units that you're going to do at that site. Are you going to try to make this sort of a mixed income community, and you're bringing in some other units as well? So here's where you would populate at row 47, how many units are converting. So Leanne, let's just put 108 on 2 bedrooms or whatever. So what we've done is we've entered the number of units that were there. I did this purposely to put in 108 for 2 bedrooms because there is nothing in RAD that says you have to bring back the same distribution of units. You can, whatever sort of makes sense in your community, but there's something else you have to be concerned with, which is if you're changing the bedroom distribution, RAD still, though, has a requirement for right of first return for the existing residents. And so if you're substantially changing the unit distribution, then either it's because those families are going to go into the new appropriately sized units because that's what they need, or because families have voluntarily chosen to waive their right of return to the property. And in some cases that's happened where PHAs have changed the distribution, but where the residents have said, I'm voluntarily willing to go somewhere else right now. And sometimes PHAs might make them an offer at another public housing site, or they may have another tax credit site, or they may have the Housing Choice Voucher Program that they have some turnover in. And so that's fine. They can do that, but it has to be voluntary on the part of residents. So there's no requirement in RAD to create the same bedroom distribution, but you do have to sort of honor the right to return unless people voluntarily waive it. And just to also say that if you change the bedroom distribution, you are likely going to change the initial RAD rents. So the RAD rents do kind of float with bedroom distribution. So generally the way to think of this is what we're going to give you in subsidy under RAD is going to be the subsidy more or less you would have received if you had stayed in the public housing program. So in the public housing program, if you happen to change your bedroom distribution and from one year to the next go from 2 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms because you did some modernization, then the HUD funding formula for public housing would be adjusted accordingly. You would get a higher amount because the larger bedroom units get more funding, small bedroom units get less funding. So if your bedroom distribution increases, then your RAD rents will increase relative to what you have today. And if your bedroom distribution decreases, then you'll get your contract rent will be adjusted downward because that's how you would have been treated in the public housing program. And the application itself will do that. It will automatically, based on whatever distribution you put in there, give you the revised number or contract rent for you. Okay, so that's rows sort of 46 through 50. The next chart is utility allowances. And this is really important because we have a lot of PHAs that unfortunately sort of get tripped up here, and we probably could have provided more guidance or fatal errors. What we're asking you to do, where it says utility allowance on row 56, is enter the utility allowance that exists for that property both today and only if the property has a utility allowance. If the PHA is proposing to change from project-paid utilities to tenant-paid utilities, do not include that in the application. We will deal with that after you make an award. If you want to put a note in somewhere in the application in the narrative section saying you're going to eventually convert to tenant-paid utilities, that's fine. You'll be able to do that. But in order for us to be able to be consistently review these applications and make those reviews tie back to our existing data systems, that you should assume you have the same utility configuration as you have today. So if you don't have tenant-paid utilities, then put 0 there. But if you have tenant-paid utilities, put whatever the appropriate tenant utility allowance is for those bedroom sizes. And then the next row is reasonable rents. So what are reasonable rents? Reasonable rents is the term we use in the project-based voucher program to mean essentially the market rent for the property. So what we want you to do is tell us what's your best guess right now. This is not required to be a market study. This is just simply your best estimate. In most cases, should be your flat rents. If you're doing flat rents properly in public housing, flat rents are supposed to represent the market, but that's not always the case. It's not always the case that PHAs have updated their flat rents or whatever appropriately. So put in your estimated market rent for those units. This is only makes an issue, makes a difference if you convert to for all practical purposes. It really only makes a difference if you're converting to project-based vouchers, and our current funding to you happens to be greater than market, then your property may be experiencing one of our RAD rent caps. But that's all this is put in there for. It's sort of an early proxy of what's your reasonable, what's your market rent, and as a result of that, is this property, if the funding to you today is grossly in excess of the market rent, there may be a rent cap which the application will calculate. But that's the only reason why we use this row right now, is to estimate if you would be subject to a rent cap. Okay. We have a question as we've been going along, so let's see if this is related to it. So go ahead. Asmara, you have a question? Asmara? Okay, you might be on mute. Okay, so all right, we'll come back. Okay, so now we'll go to the next section, which is de minimis reduction. And what this does is it starts off by saying, hey, your property shows as of having 108 units. You are proposing to do 108. Therefore, none are being proposed to be reduced. You could have knocked out or got rid of 5 units without any question, because there's a 5% threshold, a 5% de minimis reduction. And so you're not above the de minimis threshold. In other words, this is pretty easy. When you start off by essentially replacing all the units you have, then this section of the form, there isn't much to do. You're not losing any units. It's only when you're doing a partial conversion and your AMP might be, say, 300 units and you're only proposing to do 100, then the application form will say, I don't understand. The project showed 300 and you're losing 200. Tell me why you're losing 200. And then you would then go into rows 65 through 69 and explain why the number of units that you're converting doesn't equal the number of units at the property minus the de minimis. And so it could be the units have already received Section 18 demo dispo. It could be you're reconfiguring efficiency apartments, so therefore you're dropping 100 zero-bedroom units and making 51s. It could be that some units you're converting to social service. You also have a complete sort of pass on any units that have been vacant for more than 24 months. You do not have to replace those under our one-for-one requirements. Or you're not converting the whole site. You're only converting partial. And so you would ask you to enter this so that the data adds up. And then you would provide a little narrative in the gray box just explaining it to us. So this is one area where we probably have one of the most sort of common areas for us after we get an application is for us to do a follow-up call, because often people just get stuck here. So, Cheryl?
The more that you can explain in the 72, that area there where it asks you, allows you to provide more information. The more you can say there to us, the better, because that's very, very helpful.
Right, because what we don't want just to make life easier is the more we don't need to call you, an application, this can just be automatic. We look at it, everything adds up, then it's easier for you, it's easier for us. So yeah, so if you do have any squirrely things going on, just give us some narrative, and then we're great. Okay, so you've explained. Now we've got we've gone through section 3. We've got a couple people who are trying to get in for calls, so we're going to take a call now from Asmara. Asmara, you have a question for us?
Yes, I'm sorry. I accidentally hit. I hung up before.
That's okay.
So my question was regarding going back to the rent and the utility allowance part.
Yes.
So you said leave the utility allowance section alone unless the resident is paying or unless the housing authority is changing the structure?
Right. So leave it. You only put a utility allowance there if you currently have a utility allowance for the project. Not if you're proposing to change, do not include that with the application. It's just prepare your numbers as if you're still going to do project paid. Put a note somewhere just to give us a heads up. But we learned sort of after we built this tool that we really hadn't properly built the tool for people who are proposing to do changes in utility configurations, and we realized we were really going to get tripped up if we tried to sort of build that in at this stage. So let me we're going to go to the validation tab for a moment because I want to show you something.
Okay.
In the validation tab for this property, go down a little bit lower, and in the budget, hold on. So you'll see for this property, here's the annual financial statements for this project for the past couple of years. And you'll see that it says utility expense, $400,000, $300,000, $281,000, 3-year average. So this comes off the agency's own financial statements. So usually when you see a big nut like that, it usually means, oh, there is project paid utilities at this project. And then when you go up a little bit higher in it, you also see on our row 45, it shows today that at least from PIC, we're not showing any utility allowance. So for this particular project, while this is one where we should have built in a fatal error, and we should have said, well, if row 45 is 0, then what you enter in the other, so the first part should also be 0, but we just didn't do that. So when you're filling out your application, sort of this, you should know whether you do utility allowance or not, but at least our data system in this particular project says no, and it's corroborated by the fact there's a large utility bill for this particular project. So if you are planning to convert to tenant-paid utilities, don't build that in yet to the application. Sort of still submit as if the project is paying utilities.
That's another area where you could use maybe that same comment area in like 72 or whatever it was. If you could describe that, that would be helpful, because we find ourselves going back to ask people and confirming the utility situation so we understand what you want to do and we make sure we process it correctly.
Okay, so as far as that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question. And just another question on the same area about the rents, the reasonable rents. You said that should be what we believe to be the market rent, or?
Yes, what you believe is market. It's just your best guess right now, because what that's going to mean is, again, it really only affects if the subsidy to you today is, I guess, for sake of a better term, handsome, and that subsidy is sort of much greater than market, then there's a chance that the project may be subject to one of our rent caps. And so this will size the rent cap, but it's only because we don't have data for you yet on what the actual reasonable rents are. So we're just saying as a proxy, if you happen to have been your reasonable rents, this is how much your rent might have been capped by. And so it's not binding. It's only for the purpose of the application. If anyone is doing an application and they feel as if this is sort of causing a problem, then just send us a call, or give us a call or send us an email. But yeah, you just use your best estimate for now.
So let me. I don't mean to hog the call,
sure.
But what if you believe that the market? This is obviously we're in the District of Columbia, so the properties that we are considering are in a higher rent area. They're in Columbia Heights.
Okay.
So the RAD rent actually, I think, is lower. The RAD contract rent of 1308 is actually lower than what the market rent is. How do you reconcile that in terms of? What we wanted to do in the program early on, of course, was when we first were introducing the Transforming Rental Assistance Initiative, was our initial goal was, hey, this is going to be easy. Let's just give everybody the market rents. Mm-hmm. That was our original proposal, but the Congress essentially was less than polite and came back and said no way. That there wasn't the funding to be able to sort of pull off that where it would cost us $1.5 billion or more to sort of give all public housing authorities the market rents. So that's why you're living with the existing rent. So in your case, if you're saying that in Columbia Heights the market rent is $500 or $1,000 more than what the RAD rents will be, the good news for that is for you is you're not going to be experiencing a rent cap. You're already below market if that's the case. So that's really the most important thing for you to know is that what we give you today will not be, you won't be capped at all. Unfortunately, you'd like to have the market rent, but we just have no ability under RAD to give you the market rent. So that's really the only implication for you. So you're fine. Okay.
Okay. We also have a couple questions from two others. So Gina again. Gina?
Yes, I was curious, when you go down further in the tool and you talk about the reduction from the total number of units,
yes.
If you have a development where you feel it's too concentrated today and you're going to be removing part or all of that development and doing new construction,
yep.
Would you use that partial conversion line to indicate
No.
that
So in that case, we don't care where you put it. We just care whether you lose it. So if you're knocking down a 100-unit property and you're putting it some other place, you're splitting it 50 units at another site, 30 at some other site, and 20 at your site, but you're bringing me back 100 units altogether, not a partial conversion. You are replacing the 100 units. It's only if for some reason you had a 100-unit site and you're only bringing back 80, we want to know, well, why you're only bringing back, wherever you're putting it, why are you only bringing back 80? Is it because you're flipping out some of the efficiencies, or have you indeed not met our de minimis test?
Okay, but when we go further down in the application,
yep.
If I remember correctly, it's going to ask for the sources and uses.
Yep.
Would you then just consolidate all of your projects in that sources and uses, or should you submit this multiple times and just submit it together so it's clear that all the units are coming back?
Okay, so if it's one financing, then you're going to show us the sources and uses for whatever that. Again, if it's a 100-unit project, you're just rebuilding on site. You're going to do 100. But if you're going to split this up into 2 separate phases and 2 separate financing packages, I'm looking at Cheryl Tennigan and Ian Goldfarb, who are here with us now, and just to affirm, we want them to give us 2.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So Cheryl, can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. In many cases, housing authorities have taken 1 amp and decided through RAD to convert that to 2 projects. And so they have submitted an application for each project, primarily because they have a different financing mechanism for each one, and it's cleaner to handle that with 2 applications rather than just the 1.
And then if you right, and then if instead what you're doing is, so if you know you're doing 2 projects and you've already scoped it out and you want to get an award, and start moving, great. If also you're saying, what I'm really doing is I'm building out in multiple phases and I want to apply under a multi-phase award under RAD, then you can give us the pro forma for just the first phase, and then say you're doing, and then in accordance with the notice, give us the the timing for the other phases. So it all depends on sort of how you've conceived your project.
Can I give it maybe a more specific kind of example and see if I understand correctly? If I
go ahead.
I'm sorry. If I have a 300-unit development and it's
yep.
on a very concentrated site, and we want to split that site up a bit, so we would do some deconcentration there and some modernization of the existing units, maybe with a 4% tax credit, and then also simultaneously have another site, get it under control, do a 9% tax credit, and build. How would I? But it would have all been 1 amp to start off with.
Right. So if you're certain about the first phase only, then you would give us put in an application for, but you wanted to build out the whole thing. Is you could give us an application for the first phase, but call it a multi-phase project. Give us the pro forma for the first phase in this application, and then you would attach to that essentially a sheet that would show what the other phases would be and sort of the general timing of them. And we call that, under the new notice, a multi-phase award. And then you have...
She wants to know what to do with Section 3, though. I guess the best way, the easiest way, would be if you probably did put it at the partial conversion for whatever that first phase was, and then when you submit your additional apps for the following phases, you would put the rest of them.
Right, because I could see those being pretty much going concurrently.
Right.
So,
yeah,
I just didn't want to throw the tool out.
Right. So we're again looking at each other here in the room, trying to say, okay, so this is again one where we introduced this multi-phase concept in the revised notice, but the original application hadn't contemplated a multi-phase. So let us do this. Let us, rather than opine on it right now, let us go back as a team, and we'll send out both to you, but to all the people on the call, instructions on how to handle that on the form. Okay?
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. We have a okay. So we'll continue down through the form for a moment, and so again, now you're in Section 4, and in Section 4. This is really what there's 2 parts of it. First is, do you have any debt on the property? Well, most housing authorities don't have any debt on the property because the public housing was HUD paid for it when the buildings were constructed. The 2 most common sources of debt the PHAs have, either it's because I have a capital fund financing program that I did, or I have an energy performance contract. And so what we want you to do is just list that, because then when you go through and build the development budget, we're going to presume that you're going to refinance this. We want you to sort of show us that you're taking care of this through the conversion, and that you're addressing this existing debt on the property. So that's what you're listing there. And then right below that, you're showing us, once again, not through any, we're not requiring any capital needs study at the time of application, but purely if you happen to have a current study, terrific. But otherwise, it's your best estimate of your capital needs that are, what are immediate, what are short-term, meaning from years 2 to 5, and then what is long-term, 6 to 20, and then just tell us where you got that from. You could say, well, I just had a study by such and such associates, great. Or you could say, my maintenance mechanic walked the building, and this is how they came up with the numbers, whatever, just to give us a basis. And obviously, later on, we're going to want to make sure, the reason why we break this out into those 3 buckets is that when you show us your development budget, we want to make sure that somehow you've identified a source of capital to take care of immediate. Then we want to make sure that whatever replacement reserve that you're putting aside every year is, first of all, there's enough money in the replacement reserve account to take care of the short-term needs. Sometimes the short-term needs can be so significant that I don't have enough time to build up my replacement reserve, in which case we then will require you to do an initial deposit to cover the first couple of years so you have time to catch up. So that's why we're breaking it out into those categories. But again, it's your best estimate at this stage. Okay, we'll go to the next section. Still in the same section as replacement reserve funding, actually just kicks back to you based what you said was the data, is how much you either need to put into an initial deposit, if at all, and what your annual deposits will be. And what we ask you to say is, you know, do you want to, what's your proposal? Your proposal can never be less than our proposal. But if you happen to want to put more aside, you can do that. But we just want to make sure that you're not doing less than our formula amount. Okay. So then you're just, Section 5, putting in what the vacancy rate and the bad debt is. And generally, we start with 3% and 2%, and if there's a large variation from your historical, then we'd want you to acknowledge that and to say, well, yeah, it's been vacant for X number of years, but that's because they have efficiency apartments, and I'm going to knock them out. So, okay, that's vacancy, bad debt, other rental potential. So if you listed that there were other units you were building on the site, doing some mixed income community, you here show us how many of those units, or show what the rent is going to be, and what the bad debt and vacancy loss for those if you're expecting a different schedule than for the public housing. Other income, pretty self-explanatory, just whatever, laundry receipts, vending income, all that. And we just ask you to put a note about how you came up with it. Okay, so now we're into Section 8. And Section 8 starts, and what we want you to do is show us your operating expenses. And it says, are you proposing this conversion with new construction? And when it says yes, then what you don't have to enter is the latest approved operating budget. It's already blanked out for you, because if it's new construction, who cares what your latest approved operating budget is? But if we had clicked no, it's not new construction, it's really the same site, then we're interested in knowing what your existing operating budget is. And really all we're trying to do in this is to say to you that, yes, we expect most of you to probably be cutting your expenses through RAD because either you're doing renovations or because the program is going to be simpler than public housing. So that's fully expected. But we want to make sure you're not being too unrealistic. And so anytime either a particular row or the total expenses are less than 85% of historical either being your current budget or your last 3 years of annual financial statements, then it's going to give you a flag, and it's going to say, why is it that you think you can do this for less than 85%? It's not that you can't. You can just, we want to see a narrative, and it's not binding, but it will give you a red flag unless you explain the red flag. And here under the rows 172 to 179 is just telling you what is it that you submitted to us in your annual financial statements and what it costs to run those properties for those same line items in the budget. And the first one is 1900 at AFS, but really should be 2009. We didn't have a program in 1900, but it should be the last 3 years of annual financial statements. and then it gives you an average, which is on the last entry in 179, and that average says, okay, overall, I spend $929 for the past 3 years when I'm running this property. Good for this PHA. It's been cutting its costs for the last 3 years. And so we would just say we would be concerned if you're entering 85% of 929 or somewhere around 820,000, is we'd want to just highlight why is it that you think you can reduce those expenses even more. So the only difference between row 175 and 179 is 175 is your actual financial statements, but if for whatever reason there had been some post-submission changes to those, and that you had some newer, if you wanted to correct it, you could. But otherwise, most PHAs, there's no correction there. Okay, so that's operating. Cheryl?
Can we go back to Section 7 a minute?
Yeah, we're going back to 7%.
Yeah, on Section 7, I've seen some housing authorities put sources of income in there, such as a capital fund or some Section 8 funds or from some of their other programs. And bear in mind that there will not be an ongoing source of capital funding for the property, and because that obviously becomes your rent. In terms of Section 8, you need to, if you are thinking of supplementing this with some of your Section 8 funds, you need to make sure that they are available for the full term of this, because I know that what you have today may not be what's there tomorrow.
Right.
Just sort of a word of caution.
So if you run a voucher program, one of the questions we often get is, hey, I got a voucher program, I have net restricted assets, NRA, which in the voucher program means HUD made some half payments to you, and you didn't use all the half payments for your voucher program, and so you have a little residual left over. Some people say, can I throw that into RAD? No, you can't. That money that HUD gives you today under the voucher program can only be used for the voucher program. Unless you're a moving to work agency, that's a little bit different. We won't go into that. But if I'm a normal PHA, I can't use any of my HAP reserves for in the voucher program for RAD. But if I have some old admin fee reserve monies, there is some possibilities for that. But again, sometimes we'll see some odd things in here that may cause us during application review to go back and ask you, say, is this money real? Is you really going to get this? Is this what's the source? And to clarify. Okay, thanks, Cheryl. We'll go down to Section 9 now. Section 9. All Section 9 does is spit back to you what you've entered so far. So this is just a way for you to double check to make sure that before you keep going further in the form, that everything you've entered makes sense, so just save yourself some time. Okay, so now Section 10. The first question we ask you is, are you taking out a mortgage? And if it's either yes or no. If you put no, then you can skip the rest of the section. But if you say yes, then we want to essentially know what the terms are for the mortgage. And also this one, are you doing FHA insurance? We ask that it's helpful for us once we make an award to who we're going to sign this to in terms of a transaction manager, because we have different teams. Some are transaction managers that are the FHA insurance underwriting team, and they'll be both your transaction manager and your underwriter for the FHA loan, which is a nice, sweet deal. But if not doing FHA, then we assign it to a different team that won't be doing the FHA underwriting. So that's the only reason we ask this. It's not binding in any other manner. But then we're asking for you for the basic terms, and so what is the interest rate, what's the mortgage insurance premium, the term, maturity, debt coverage ratio, and then it will calculate what the maximum supportable loan would be based on what you put in, and then we then ask you, well, what are you going to take out for a loan, and you just have to make sure that number is not larger than what the deal could support. Okay, so that's Section 10. Section 11 is where you build out what you're going to use the funds for. And it already enters if you had some existing loans under either CFFP or under CFFP or EPC, but also whatever you entered as immediate capital needs would show up here as construction costs. It's telling you that's how much construction I need to do. And then the rest is whatever you think. And these are, we have some standards and ratios next to every question mark that if you sort of are guided by it, can tell you what the item is. No one should have presumed that they have to fill out every one of these. We give you more rows than necessary. If your PHA is converting and you're doing very little rehab, that the property is in very good shape, it's very common for someone to only have 1 or 2 or 3 of these rows even populated. So these are there for you to use, but not always needed. And just as I'm at it, so on the reserves, so it shows that you didn't need to do initial deposit replacement reserve. These reserves are only reserves that might be mandated by some others, like if you're doing tax credits, then oftentimes half of a year's of operating expenses or debt service, as you'll find that the investor will want to sort of have you put up. But RAD itself has no reserve requirement other than a replacement reserve. There's no such thing as an operating reserve for RAD that's RAD required. If you're just doing a regular conversion and you're taking out a first mortgage loan and you're not doing anything fancy, we don't require any additional reserve other than simply the replacement reserve. Okay, so that's the developer, so that's the uses of funds, and then the sources of funds. In addition to whatever first mortgage loan that you decided to take out that gets carried over, then we're simply asking you now to complete the rest of the sources, and the application will not go forward unless your sources at least exceed your uses. If it turns out that you have sources that are less than the uses, it will tell you a flag, and it will say you can't submit this application until you show us what the sources of funds are. We've got a question. Asmara, you've got another follow-up question?
Yes. So regarding the uses, what if we're not using the money to redevelop our projects because our projects have undergone recent rehabilitation?
Right. So in that case, let's say you were taking out a first mortgage loan that's in excess of the needs of the property. You were going to use it to go do repairs at some other property or build a gymnasium or whatever. That's fine. It just means that your sources would exceed your uses. No problem with that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So then we've done the sources, we've done the uses, and now we're into a section of low-income housing tax credits. This is really mostly applicable to the 9% credits. If you're doing 9%, we just didn't want everyone to throw an application in and say, "Oh, I've solved this project because I'm going to get 9% credit." So what we want you to do is tell us a little bit about the tax credit sort of situation in your state, and why do you think you'd be competitive. So it's just forcing you to sort of to show us that you've thought this through. So we'll skip through that section right now, and then the next section is ranking factors. That was only applicable during the original open window, competitive application, initial application period. It's not applicable now. You can fill it out if you want, but it's not. It doesn't have any bearing. So we didn't revise the application, so it's just still there, but you can just let it go. And then the last, next to last part, these additional narratives are simply things that are helps us better understand what's going on with the project. And if something down the road sort of comes up, we can go back to the application and say, oh, yeah, that's right. They identified that there was an environmental issue and all. So tell us a little bit about the property and tell us about environmental issues and if there are accessibility modifications and things like that. So we'll go to the next section. This last section will tell you, section 16, will tell you based on everything you entered what pieces of paper you have to give us in addition to this application form. And so you're going to, in this case, you're going to give us a board approval form, and you're going to give a financing letter of interest and resident comments, but that's it. But if you had checked other boxes earlier, it may have triggered you to submit some other materials in addition to what's listed there. So this is a way of you saying, oh yeah, reminding you which things you need to submit. I got a call. No, okay. So then let's just go to the other tabs, just see what happens. So the board approval tab, what I always like about this tab is once you finish the application, of course this is the form the board's going to approve, but what's nice about this is it summarizes in a nice package that the application itself doesn't do, both the sources and uses, what did you enter, plus right below it, the pro forma. And essentially this is a nice way, it's always nice for us when we look at this, the way of measuring the feasibility of the project. But also what we're essentially asking you to do is, this is such, we think, an easy application in terms of, and we're not asking for all the materials you might otherwise do in a choice neighborhood application or a Hope 6 application. And because we are relying so much on your self-certification, that one check for us is we know that you're ultimately going to have to go to your board to get your application approved. So this is a way of neatly packaging your application without giving them the previous tab, right? They're not going to look at the previous tab. It's not going to make any sense to them. But might they look at this, or hopefully they would look at this sheet that has both the summary of the budget, the summary of the pro forma, and then some of the key narratives. And by that, if some board member might say, are you kidding me? Why are you doing such and such? Well, why are you ripping this project down when this project needs to be can be renovated? Or you think you can get a loan at that rate? Anyway, whatever it is that someone might ask you a question on, that it helps us. The fact that there's some more eyes on it than ours makes it easier for us to sort of approve the application. And again, these applications are not binding in terms of after you get awarded, your deal may change, interest rates may change, whether you plan to go to PBV, PBRA change, but at least this is your best estimate of starting off. So there's the board approval form. The financing letter of interest is essentially the same looking form as the board approval. It's whenever you have first mortgage financing, then you're asking to get some lender to say they've looked at these arrangements and it seems reasonable. There's not a binding commitment from them. The mixed finance affidavit is only if you have a mixed finance project. The only time you could submit for a mixed finance project is when both the PHA and the developer agree to do it. No one side can submit a RAD application, and this is the form that they sign. Choice mobility letter agreement is only when you're doing project, if you're a public housing only agency and you are doing PBRA and you found someone, you didn't ask for an exemption and you found someone to do the choice mobility for you. That's the only time you have to fill out this form. And then you have the PIC and validation pages for more information about these projects. Or actually, I'm still amazed at how wonderful the staff was who worked on the application to pull all this data out of PIC in one nice package, include both bedroom distribution data, but also FMRs and utility allowances and historical operating expenses. So it's really a real nice spreadsheet in terms of sort of being able to have access to all that. Okay, so that is an overview of the application, and I took more time than I wanted to. I apologize, but just to give people a sense of what we were trying to do with the application. So now we're going to go back to the live calls, and we see that Lynn has raised her hand. So Lynn, do you have a question?
We do. Michelle, I'm going to hand it to Michelle.
Okay.
I am looking at this validation page where it's saying operating fund, capital fund, tenant payments.
Yes.
Where are those numbers coming from?
Okay, so the operating fund, capital fund. So well, let's start with the capital fund first. That is the actual capital fund award for your project in 2012. So every public housing project in America actually gets an award, even though you might have multiple projects in your agency and you tend to just get one lump sum, that it's actually calculated on a project basis. The Capital Fund Office used to publish that every year saying, here's your agency's award, but here's how it was generated project by project. So you can go back. If this were a one project PHA, that would precisely equal what it received in capital funds in 2012. So that's the first one. That's the easiest one. The second one, tenant payments, is precisely what is on your subsidy form for 2012. It is the tenant payments, tenant rents under the subsidy form for 2012. We just pull it directly from that. And the last one, the operating fund, is we make an adjustment for this, and this one is what you essentially this is what you received in 2012, but with the operating fund offset thrown back in. PHAs, most PHAs had to contribute funds in order to of about a $750 million nationwide that sort of came out of their reserves. It's called the operating fund offset. But when PHAs convert to RAD, if they give us an application before the end of this year, we've said that you get to get those 2012 levels, but with the offset thrown back in. So this is that number you would have received in 2012 had you not suffered the offset.
Okay, because I went off my, just to compare, I went off my FDS submission.
Yep.
And my operating, was a little less, and my tenant payments were a little bit more. And so should we stick with the numbers that are on this validation sheet?
We every once in a while there's a data error, but
okay.
In these systems, but we've not, sometimes the PHA, maybe the project came online after 2012 or something, but it's very rare that someone would find that these numbers are wrong.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's see if there's any other questions. Asmara, do you have another question?
I do. So these are actually very basic questions. So when is the due date for an application?
Right. So we had an initial application window back September 24th to October 24th, 2012. And we designed it so that that first 30-day window, that there were certain ranking factors and whatever. And we've, since that time, we were in what we call an open application window. And we have the authority to award these 60,000 units anytime between now and September 30th, 2015. We have that much time to Congress.
Oh, wow.
However, we, based on these calls and our outreach and whatnot, we are fully anticipating to be subscribed, oversubscribed by the end of this calendar year. So we have about 20,000 units right now that we've either awarded or received applications on, and they are coming in every day. Every day. They are coming in, and we appreciate that, and we love it. And so what our suggestions to people is don't wait till September 30th, 2015, and in fact, don't wait till the end of this year. We would not have done this program if we thought we were stopping at 60,000 units. It's clearly the intention of the Secretary, the Assistant Secretary, to go deeper, and we've asked the Congress for 150,000 units to increase our cap in our 2014 budget, and the Senate bill includes a provision to have us go up to 120. So we are hopeful, and we want the cap to be lifted, but for now, unless the Congress gives us more authority, we'll be stopped at 60,000 until we get more authority. So yes, the application technically window is open until 2015. We really urge you to apply sooner.
Okay. And my next question is, what is, in terms of the requirements to submit one, and they're only, I mean, there's the resident meeting, at least two resident meetings, the board approval, and the commitment from a financing team. Is there anything else? That's
about it. Right. And the application itself kind of reminds you which things you need to submit and what needs you don't. But essentially, as I'm ticking off from memory, that's really what you do. You got to have a couple tenant meetings before you submit an application, and you need to prepare this application, and you need to get a board approval form and a letter of interest from a lender, and you are good to go.
Yeah,
okay.
Back to that last section of
right.
the application that will tell you what else you have to submit
yep.
based on your information.
Okay, and my last question, I swear, is on the PCA, the fiscal that.
Yep.
So again, this is just unique to my project. They just underwent rehab, so do I still need to submit?
Right. So at the time of application, no one needs to submit. It's
right.
just your estimate. But then once you get awarded, then every project has to give a PCA unless it is either it's new construction, or you're taking the building down to the studs, or if your property was recently renovated, that it depends on sort of what the level of renovation. Sometimes PHAs did a light rehab, and we're like, no, you still need to show us because there's other work at the property. But if you just recently did, say, a mixed finance job, you just recently renovated it through mixed finance, then we've waived the PCA and those sorts. So it's on a case-by-case basis, but to show that, indeed, the property was properly renovated.
Okay, and on that, I was looking at the notice. It has specific statement of work under which basically the guidelines for
yep.
which PCA has to be done under.
Yep.
But this assumes that we're going to undergo construction. It doesn't take into consideration our situation here at the Housing Authority in the district.
It doesn't take into consideration what again?
So in the PCA
yep.
statement of work, it assumes, at least the way I read it, it assumes that we're going to undergo total construction or major rehab.
No, so that the vendor, the instruction of the vendor is they will come out and inspect the property, and they're going to look to see what needs to be repaired and what doesn't. So they don't if you tell us they're going to be new construction, then we don't do a PCA at all. But otherwise, then the PCA provider is going to go out and do an inspection of the property based on standard protocols and say, yep, that roof needs replaced in 10 years, but the refrigerators are great, they can last 20, whatever it is, they'll go through it. Okay?
Okay.
Good. Go to the next. Drew Schomburg. Drew, you still have a question?
They may be on mute.
Maybe on mute. Okay, we're going to go back to the next person. Henry Nelson. Hello, Henry, you on? Henry might also be on mute. Okay, we'll go next. We'll come back, Henry, if you're still there. Steve Rothfeld.
Yeah, hi. I missed last week's session, and I just hopped on to this week's. I came in late.
Okay.
If the question's been answered, I apologize.
All right.
Got a couple of questions. First of all, as a part of a rehab job, if we're going to be reducing the number of units,
Yes.
say hypothetically it's currently 400 units, and we're going to make the units, individual units larger and provide for more accessible units, such that we would reduce the total unit count, what would the impact be on the subsidy at that point?
Okay, so
and let's say for numbers, let's say assuming it's 400 units right now, and we'd be taking it down to 300.
okay, let's say you're taking it down to 300, and what you're going to do is you're going to go from efficiency apartments to one bedrooms.
That's correct. Or actually enhance the one bedrooms, which are horribly small.
Right.
So they wouldn't meet current housing standards.
Right. So there is a little debate. We'll need to follow back up you on this because this has come up with a couple other questions recently. Generally, what we're going to do is give you the funding for, if you're going to have a 300-unit project, what's the bedroom configuration of the new 300-unit project, and that's
okay.
Whatever that bedroom configuration times whatever the rent is for those units is what you'll get. Some PHAs have asked us, but I've got the same square footage. Is there any way I can keep the total subsidy I've got? And right now, that's not the way we've written the notice. But we are, a couple people have asked us that, so we're just doing a little bit more research before we affirmably say what we're going to do in that circumstance.
Okay, I mean, in our case, we're not going to be changing the footprint at all.
Yeah.
We're just going to be increasing bedroom sizes, probably keep the same unit mix as we currently have right now, which is increased bedroom sizes, which is going to be a net reduction in units, especially when we build out more accessible units, because it's primarily an elderly and disabled population that live in this one complex.
So, Stephen, can you do me a favor and send us a follow-up email?
Okay, we'll do.
And then we'll make sure we're tracking it. Okay.
Okay. Second question, just a real quick one. A certain amount of the capital funding was collateralized years ago.
Okay.
And timely payments have been made on the loan. At this point in time, I know from an earlier seminar you indicated that by virtue of a RAD conversion, that does not forgive the loan. Would that reduce the amount of subsidy as well?
Yes.
So if you convert under RAD, let's say you have 1,000 units in your agency, and you're going to convert a 100-unit project.
Right.
Well, because you're taking the money that agency sort of receives on behalf of that project, with you to RAD, and let's say the funding is proportional, that when you drop from 1,000 units to 900 because of RAD, your capital fund is going to drop by 10% the next year.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I'll shoot you a note on the bedroom size.
Thank you. Henry Nelson, you back on?
Actually, it's Jim Walker using
Hello,
Henry's
Jim.
thing.
Hey.
Two quick questions. One is on if you're using 4 or 9% credits, what sort of letter do you need from the state, and what does it have to say?
Right. So, Cheryl, can you answer this one? I wish I was
I've
casting.
seen all different kinds of letters.
Yeah.
Basically, we just try to get that interest letter.
But is it from so?
But, yeah, but we need something.
Yeah. So sorry for the confusion here, Jim. So there's a difference between whether I guess I'm getting a 4% or a 9% in terms of what we ask. But I apologize. Let me there's one more member of our team that's sort of more the expert on the application materials for tax credits, and I'm sorry to punt for this afternoon, but we'll follow up and get that answered for you on precisely what's needed.
That's fine. The second one was if the PHA has got future, is eligible for future RHF and wants to roll that into the calculation, how do they estimate what that future RHF is going to turn out to be? Do they use the 2012, or because it tends to vary?
Right. So use the 2012 amount. So, and just as Jim had asked, for those PHAs who are unfamiliar with the question or the subject, we said in the revised notice that a PHA, if it was still had future increments of RHF and they wanted to throw it into the deal, how might they do that? And we'd say, what you can do is, and here's the example I often use, I've got 7 years left of RHF funds, and I'm getting $100,000 a year as based on 2012. I'd like to contribute that to the deal. So we say, okay, 7 years times 100,000 is 700,000. We'll divide that by the 20 years of the contract, divide by 12 months, and then divide by 100, and that works out to $29 PUM for a 100-unit project, and that's the bump up that project would get in rents in lieu of continuing to get 7 years of 100,000 in RHF funds. So the government is sort of indifferent which way you go. Either you stay in the getting replacement housing factor funds for your agency, or you give up your replacement housing factor funds and we put it into the contract grant. So for now, the PHAs would just simply, in the application, note that that's what they're going to do, and you would put it. I think a recommendation is to put it in the other source of income section. Not in the sources, but further up, other income. So other income, list it there, and then explain that additional source of income. So that's unlike a capital fund contribution. That's an ongoing sort of subsidy to the income to the project. Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
Drew, you have a follow-up question?
Yes, hi. The question is, if we are proposing RAD and we put an application in before the end of the year and we're competing in a competitive 9% round, if we don't know about awards until July, and if we don't get an award in July, how does that affect your application and process? Can you submit with a notation that the deal also works under 4% credits, or how would that be looked at?
Right. So what we do is you certainly don't have to have an award by the time you put in an application. Once you receive an award from us, then after you get the CHAP, we expect you to apply for the next 9% round that is 90 days after award. And so if that next 9% round happens to be in day 120, then we expect you to submit a tax credit application on day 120. If it's not for another 9 months afterwards, then you've got 9 more months in which to sort of prepare your 9% application. And then if you don't get your 9%, you have 30 days, 60 days to come back and resubmit for a 4% credit. We let you sort of drop down to the 4%, but we don't allow you to sort of stick around for another year and try 9%. Yes. So a lot of PHAs who are current awardees had applied for 9%, didn't get them, and now are reworking it as 4%. Ian?
And even if you don't necessarily want to go over 4% route, you just need to provide evidence that it's feasible and show us how you're going to make it work. So it may be 4%. It may be that you got some grant money that you didn't have a year ago that you now have gotten because of home or because of some other different grants on the state or local level. I mean, as long as you can say that this project is still feasible even without the 9% credits, we're willing to try and work with you to make the deal work. It's really just that it's no longer going, you're not giving you another crack at that 9%. But we'll look at other methods to make it work.
Okay, so in filling in the application, we put in all our assumptions, and it's all predicated on the assumption you're going to win the 9%.
Yes. Okay, so it looks like we've got some written questions. Any particular ones to go in?
Yeah, we've got a question. Is the annual amount of the PBRA CBV contract rent on the validation page the amount that is expected to be seen on the HAP contract?
Yep. And the only thing that would be different is if you had utility allowances that somehow were improperly put on there. But yeah, what's in the validation page should be the same. Also, unless you had a reasonable put in a reasonable market rent that was really a wild guess and was off, and later we find out that the market rent and you were affected by the rent caps. But for all other purposes, yeah, that's what will show up.
We have another question about the resident comments, asking where in the notice are the requirements for resident meeting and comments?
So in the notice, section 1. We don't have. It's funny we didn't bring our notice with her.
I want to say 1.11.
Yeah, it's probably around 1.10 or 1.11 is the section on. 1.6 is PBV, 1.7 is PBRA. So
1.9 is how to apply.
Right. So it's somewhere between 1.8 and 1.11 is probably. Sorry that we don't have it right.
Sure it's 1.11.
Yeah.
We can send it to you.
Yeah, we'll update.
We know who it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
We'll send it.
All right. We'll send it. We'll send it to the questioner.
A similar question with the resident meetings. If during the meeting something happens and the majority of the residents say no, we don't want to go RAD, can they cause our application to be declined?
No. It's like the annual plan. You are making an executive decision as a PHA to do something. We want to make sure residents have the opportunity to comment, but it's not a approval veto on behalf of the residents. We will certainly, look to see, what they've commented. Mostly, we're looking to see if they've commented. We are not looking to see whether they agree or not.
We've got another question. Where will admin fees be funded from?
So for admin fees, so this could be a couple different questions. So one is, if you're asking, where will the management fee that I currently get under the public housing program asset management? Well, you'll still get a management fee. You'll be managed, assuming if you manage the properties, you'll still be generating it. It's just now being funded under the Section 8 contract as opposed to your public housing program. But if your admin fees, the question is, where will the admin fees if I convert to project-based vouchers? And now previously I had 1,000 vouchers and 100 units of public housing. I convert my 100 units of public housing over to the project-based voucher program, so now I have 1,100 vouchers, of which 100 of them are project-based, that under RAD, when you convert to project-based vouchers, whoever is administering that voucher contract, whether you, because your agency has a voucher program, or some other agency that you've hooked up with, they will earn a new Section 8 admin fee, and it just comes out of the larger appropriation account for admin fees for the voucher program.
Another question from Henry.
Henry or Jim, you have another question?
Yeah, different part of admin fees, but admin fees or management fees once you convert under PBRA. Will you be capped? We had a meeting with them the other day, and I think maybe for us, you can earn up to maybe something like $54 a unit. For them, you're capped at about $39 a unit.
Boy, so it's surprising that there's that much of a difference. It's an intriguing. Maybe, Jim, you and Henry and I ought to have a follow-up call sometime in the next week on it, because when we set the management fee schedules for every field office in public housing, they were based on both what owners and operators of FHA, of federally assisted housing in that market were getting funded at, plus, but then we set it not the 50% of the median, at the 80% of the median, but it still was sort of was in the band of what people were already receiving under it. So it's unusual it's that far off. So there may be a data error there, or there may in fact be some other thing going on. I'd like to
follow up.
Yeah, let's follow up a little bit of that. Okay.
Okay.
Esmar, another question?
It's actually related to the amount. So you said there's a schedule that tells you how
so
much.
If you convert to PBRA, you'll be moving over to the Office of Housing, and when you move over to the Office of Housing, then you'll be living within their rules on such things as management fees. And in public housing, our management fees are essentially based on what owners are already receiving in each market from the local, if you're in the D.C. area, the D.C. field office. So it shouldn't, notwithstanding Jim's question, it shouldn't really impact you because it should be still in the allowable range. But if for some reason we're not right, both let's research a little bit more. But B, remember that in PBRA, that in RAD, there is no such thing as a limitation on distributions, right? So that at the end of the day, whatever flows to the bottom line, the PHA receives, and it becomes their cash flow. So if for whatever reason that the $5 PUM that you're off, let's say that you were getting 70 today, and the local field office was allowing you only 65 in multifamily, if that were the case, then you weren't allowed to charge the full 70. Just means that your bottom line is going to increase by $5, and you can go back and pay yourself the additional $5. So you can do whatever you want with anything that flows to the bottom line. So it shouldn't really have any material impact on you. Just in terms of where you book it is really more what it's going to, the impact will be. Jim, you have another, or Henry?
Yeah, related to that, when we were meeting also, they said if you were set up, if your single asset entity was set up as a nonprofit, it would flow, your excess cash would flow into a residual receipts account, and there were limits and approvals on what you could spend that for.
Right. So not in RAD. So if most PHAs will set up indeed some type of affiliated nonprofit in which to own these properties once particularly if they take out a loan. But RAD has no residual receipts account. That we give you the contract grant, let's say it's $650. You operate the property, and at the end of the day, you generate $50 of surplus of excess cash or cash flow, or $75 per unit per month of cash flow, whatever the number is. That's whoever the owner of that property, that affiliated nonprofit, it's their decision to do it. They could put it back in the property if they wanted to. They could give a bonus payment to their management company. They could use it to go build housing elsewhere in the community. It doesn't matter. So unlike other HUD-assisted properties that were built during different eras, we chose not to create any residual receipts or surplus cash account. It's the owner's decision to do what they want with that excess cash.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Some more written questions.
Okay, a couple more written questions.
Does a successful PHA have to form a different board of commissioners for its RAD portfolio? In other words, for a PHA with RAD and public housing units, do they have to form a separate board for the RAD unit?
No, there's nothing in RAD that says that you have to create a different board. As a housing authority under RAD, you can either own the units, continue to own the units under the PHA main umbrella, or you can create your own nonprofit in which to own it. You can give it to any other nonprofit. You can give it to any other public entity, or in the tax credits, you could create or give it to a for-profit entity. Any one of those you can do. Now, most likely, if you're going to take out a loan on a property, the lender is going to want to have a single asset entity, so that's what drives PHAs to sort of put it in their nonprofit. But that's only for the purposes of satisfying lender requirements for single asset entities. Again, if the property doesn't need any work or any fine, doesn't require a mortgage loan or something like that, then the chances are you'll just continue to own it under the normal PHA. But other cases, more commonly, you'll create a nonprofit, affiliated nonprofit of the PHA or a subsidiary that will own the asset.
We have another written question from Edward about correcting the unit, pick units in the RAD application. Can we increase our unit count with office space, meeting space, and police substation?
So you can't go above what our records show to be the number of units at the property. So if I have a 100-unit property, that's what I originally built, I can't ask for RAD for 105. But if I had a 100-unit property and 5 of those units at one point were sort of converted into social services or were used for police, you can grab those units back and convert them, and we'll add the funding to make that possible. But but not if it increases the original number of units that the project was built at.
And another written question, how soon will a PHA see funding after conversion to RAD?
So when you apply, that we, although we're busting a little bit at the seams, we are at a point where we're turning around applications in 30 days. And so you will get an award within 30 days. And then we generally expect PHAs to close within 9 months to a year. So at that point, that's when we turn off the public housing spigot and we turn on the Section 8 spigot. But for PHAs with uncomplicated transactions, it's very possible that you could convert within 3 or 4 months after conversion if everything was lined up and you gave us things. So that might be a little pushing it, maybe 5 months, but so generally in most transactions expect 4 to 5 months to 9 to 12 months before you actually close and you leave the public housing program and start receiving funding under Section 8. Okay, that's it for written. We're just going to look once more to see if we see any hands raised. All right, so we've got hands raised, and we're going to make this probably our last question to see what we've got so far. Gina, you have a question?
Actually, can I sneak two in real quick?
Yeah.
One is, how long does the resident comment period need to stay open?
There's no, we just say you have to have 2 meetings with your residents. So whenever you want to do one today and the next one tomorrow, it's up to you.
Okay, and then, and this is just a mechanical question. I understand that these sessions were recorded, and I thought that I had seen something on one of them that they were going to be posted, the Q&A sessions, and I haven't been able to find them online.
Okay, Leanne?
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have those early next week on radresourcedesk.net, and then also they'll be uploaded to HUD.gov, I would say, in the coming weeks. So check out radresource.net by Monday. They should be up there.
Thank you so much.
And I think we will try to get them onto our post website as well. That may take a little bit more time.
Okay. Any written questions or? No. Okay. All right. Sounds like we were able to satisfy most of the questions that people had for today. Again, thanks everybody for your continued interest and involvement. And we will, if there's more demand, we will have another session next Thursday. So for those, we look forward to seeing you back next Thursday. Thanks.